of hospitals, you could make a lot of job creation if you were using $25,000 a minute differently from debt repayment. So there's this drain, and I think people don't understand that it is actually the South that is financing the North. If you look at the flows of money from North to South and then from South to North, what you find is that the South is financing the North to the tune of about $200 billion every year.
El único que puede contratar créditos con los organismos internacionales es el Estado boliviano, es el Estado. Por consecuencia, el Estado, cuando contrata créditos bien o mal utilizados, ¿quién los paga? No es el gobierno boliviano, lo pagan los ciudadanos bolivianos con sus impuestos. En un momento dado había que cada niño que estaba naciendo ya estaba con una porción importante, y es más, un país que tiene una deuda, un stock de deuda de $7,000 millones y que tiene 8 millones o 9 millones de habitantes, dividamos la relación y esto casi coincide con el Producto Bruto Interno.
By analyzing poverty into those three elements, I think we can also begin to understand why poverty is so much more extreme in third world countries in the South than it is in the first world countries in the North. In the North, poverty exists largely because the resources are owned by a small elite of individuals and corporations. In the South, the same is true. The resource division is equally skewed towards a small elite. But the South also faces the continuing problem of unbalanced trade and the problem of debt. Poverty exists in every country in the world. There is no denying that. But the poverty is much more extreme in the countries that are dealing with this triple problem of trade, debt, and monopoly power over resources.
By the beginning of the 20th century, the entire Third World had been split up among the powers of the North. The two world wars forced the North to create new tools to stabilize the now global economy. The IMF and the World Bank were created with such an agenda, but rapidly they turned their focus toward the Third World, where new leaders trying to bring economic independence to their countries had emerged. The reaction was swift and used all the tools available to bring these countries back to their previous role, like the loans of the World Bank and the structural adjustment programs of the IMF. These would later lead to the crises in Latin America, Asia, and Russia, and plunge millions below the poverty line. This new U.S.-born economic model became known as neoliberalism, and the set of policies used to enforce it became the Washington Consensus, which forced all economies to let the market govern everything.
El proyecto neoliberal es un proyecto de transformación profunda de estas sociedades. El neoliberalismo en América Latina significó una recomposición de sectores productivos, significó una reducción del mercado interno, significó un proceso profundo de desindustrialización, produjo una reinserción de la economía de América Latina y una reprimarización de la producción en América Latina, donde las nuevas formas de inserción fueron nuevamente formas de inserción características de las formas del imperialismo clásico, que era fundamentalmente de materias primas.
The Washington Consensus was a set of policies that was a consensus between 15th Street in Washington and 19th. 15th Street is where U.S. Treasury is. 18th is where the World Bank, 19th is where the IMF. It was not a consensus among the developing countries. It was a consensus among a relatively small group of people who had a particular mindset, and a particular mindset during the period, you have to remember, that Reagan was president of the United States, Thatcher was leader in the UK, a very conservative mindset that didn't reflect good economic policy, economic theory, as I would understand good economic theory. It had a particular political view of economics.
The Washington Consensus had 4 key strands. First of all, capital account liberalization. Secondly, trade liberalization. Thirdly, reduce your taxes, stimulate growth, follow the Laffer curve, a bit like following the yellow brick road. It led nowhere at all, but tax revenues went south for most developing countries, particularly in Africa. The fourth strand of the Washington Consensus was sell up your state's assets. And in most cases, they were sold off so badly, and the fees that were paid to World Bank consultants and all of the Western consultants involved were so astronomical that the end price that many developing countries got for their sales were minimal.
All of the public companies, whether they had to do with investing in agriculture or whether they were public telephone companies or public whatever, roads companies or all of that, or nearly all, has had to be privatized. So there again, you get an opportunity for private companies to extract wealth. The World Bank used to publish, maybe it still does, but all through the 80s and the early 90s, every year it published in microscopic print long lists of companies that had been privatized in its member countries under structural adjustment programs. And every year, I counted them approximately. It was sort of 1,300 to 1,500 companies a year. They were sometimes bought by local elites. They were often, particularly the larger ones, bought by our own transnational corporations.
Bolivia became the lab rat. Bolivia was absolutely the chief test lab in South America for these policies of privatization, market fundamentalism, the things that led to the water revolt, that led to all of these issues here in Bolivia. And that's really the trajectory of how Bolivia got here historically.
En el caso de las líneas de tren, de la línea FESE, prácticamente han desaparecido. Después de que se ha privatizado, después de que se ha capitalizado. Hoy día no tenemos, por lo menos en el occidente no hay más trenes. Se ha desmantelado todo. Hoy día, no hace mucho, hace el mes anterior, si mal no me equivoco, teníamos unos cientos de trabajadores con 7 meses impago. O sea, se ha destruido el país. Esa es la consecuencia de la privatización.
El gobierno boliviano, por decisión e imposición del Banco Mundial, decide privatizar el agua. Para esto el gobierno toma 2 medidas. Primero, la redacción de una ley de agua potable y el contrato de concesión por 40 años con la empresa transnacional Bechtel.
It was like the last thing to privatize here because the governments before already privatized everything, railroads, airlines, telecommunications. So like water was the last frontier to cross.
Actualmente yo gano 35,50 centavos es nuestro jornal que ganamos. Somos jornaleros, no somos así. Nos paga por día que paga trabajado. Y yo voy a ganar 60, o sea, voy a llegar a pagar 60 bolivianos. ¿De dónde voy a cubrir para el agua? Solamente para agua. Para comer no hay. Para vestir, para la familia no hay.
Some parts of the law said that all the water sources suddenly will not belong to the communities or to the people or neighborhoods. They will belong to the water company now. Suddenly, these things that were common were not common anymore.
They came here and within a month of taking over, they raised people's water rates by an average of 50%, in some cases double and more. People took to the streets and said they wouldn't take it, and faced down bullets, faced down a state of martial law.
porque ese llamado no solamente afectaba a las cooperativas o los pozos de agua, sino que también